What if the most dangerous secret in human history wasn't hidden in a forgotten vault, but written plainly across the heavens, waiting only for the right set of eyes to decipher it? What if the ancient myths of gods arriving on a colossal celestial body weren't folklore, but a precise orbital forecast? Tonight, we delve into the terrifying journey of Dr. Alistair Finch, a man whose life as a respected astronomer at the Institute of Astronomy, Cambridge, was irrevocably shattered when a routine observation of a tiny, seemingly insignificant interstellar object, 3I Atlas, pulled him face first into the heart of the Anunnaki revelation. His discovery did not just rewrite cosmology, it redefined the very nature of threat to our little blue planet. Dr. Finch was, by all accounts, the archetype of the meticulous British academic. Reserved, fond of a proper cuppa, and utterly devoted to the cold, undeniable mathematics of the cosmos. His office, located in a wing of the Institute known for its oppressive quiet and the faint scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in the weak winter light, was his sanctuary. For years, he tracked distant comets and asteroids, part of the wider network dedicated to planetary defense. It was a tedious yet necessary job. He believed in data. He believed in the observable universe. He did not believe in ancient alien gods or rogue planets, known only through discredited Sumerian tablets. That belief system, however, was about to be utterly dismantled by a flash of light traversing the void. The initial report came from the Atlas Survey Telescope in Hawaii, a vast, complex machine that scans the night sky for moving objects. The object, catalogued as 3I Atlas, was fast, unusual, and definitely interstellar. But many objects are. The astronomical community gave it a polite nod, logged its trajectory, and moved on. Except for Dr. Finch. Something about the data, the sheer velocity coupled with a subtly unnatural curve in its path, niggled at the edge of his professional intuition. He spent a sleepless fortnight poring over the spectral analysis. The initial assumption was that it was a rogue comet, perhaps ejected from a distant star system. But the composition, the specific chemical signatures, didn't match any known interstellar composition models. It was dense, unnervingly metallic, and moving with an almost deliberate intent. He remembered the specific night clearly. The heating in his old Cambridge flat had packed up, leaving a chill that seemed to permeate his bones, matching the cold dread beginning to settle in his stomach. He was wrapped in a thick woolen jumper, sipping lukewarm tea, the glow of the monitors casting an eerie light across the cluttered desk. The datasets from 3I Atlas were overlaid with predictive models. The standard solar gravity simulation resulted in a smooth parabolic curve, sending the object harmlessly out of the solar system. But Finch, driven by that nagging suspicion, began accounting for minute gravitational perturbations that shouldn't exist. He started adding an unknown variable, a massive distant body influencing the object's path from far beyond the Kuiper belt. It was a leap of faith that mathematical purists would scoff at, but the results were instantaneous and terrifying. When he applied the theoretical gravitational pull of a hypothesized, massive planetary body, one positioned far beyond Neptune, tilted at an impossible angle, and following a chaotic, elongated 3,600-year orbit, the trajectory of 3I Atlas snapped into place. It was not a random wanderer. It was an advanced scout, a debris fragment, or perhaps even a guided probe, perfectly slotted into a temporary orbital path dictated by something colossal and hidden. The math screamed Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, the very name whispered in discredited archaeological circles. Dr. Finch felt a profound shiver, a mixture of scientific exhilaration and deep, existential terror. The implications were staggering. If his calculations were correct, then not only did the mythical planet X exist, but its very presence validated the Sumerian accounts of celestial conflict and the arrival of the Anunnaki. He tried to rationalize it away. Maybe the initial observations were flawed. Maybe the gravitational anomaly was a cluster of undiscovered minor planets. But the elegance of the Nibiru hypothesis, how neatly it solved the three-eye atlas puzzle, was mathematically intoxicating. He knew with absolute certainty that only profound personal discovery can bring, that he had stumbled onto something that would either grant him a Nobel Prize or label him a lunatic. Given the scale of the revelation, the confirmation of ancient alien overlords and a planet-sized threat, he suspected the latter was far more likely. He looked out the window at the quiet streets of Cambridge, the old university buildings cloaked in fog, and wondered if he was the only person awake who truly understood what was coming. His duty, as he saw it, transcended the bounds of peer review. He had to warn the world. Se esse começo já te fez repensar o que sabia sobre a história da Terra e as lendas que a cercam, imagina o que vem pela frente. Então, já deixa seu like e se inscreve no canal, porque aqui cada vídeo revela algo que poucos têm coragem de mostrar. We're only scratching the surface of Dr. Finch's terrifying discovery. Dr. Finch knew that data alone would be insufficient. He needed historical corroboration, something physical that predated modern astronomy to validate the Sumerian accounts. The morning after his discovery, fueled by stale biscuits and an overdose of caffeine, he booked a train to London. He didn't tell anyone at the Institute where he was going. He simply left a cryptic note about urgent archival research and disappeared into the British fog. His destination: the echoing, cavernous halls of the British Museum, specifically the Mesopotamian collection. The air within the museum archive was thick and heavy, smelling faintly of formaldehyde, dust, and the slow decay of millennia-old clay. The silence was broken only by the occasional shuffling of archival staff. He was looking for something specific: the cuneiform tablets related to the epic of creation, the Enuma Elish, and the numerous records detailing the celestial bodies known to the Sumerians. He specifically focused on the records pertaining to the Great Destroyer, or the Winged Planet, Tiamat's ancient adversary, which the later Akkadian texts referred to as Nibiru. The library staff, accustomed to the eccentricities of academics, reluctantly granted him access to the restricted section, filled with row upon row of climate-controlled shelving. He donned thin white gloves, the mandatory accoutrement of any scholar handling such fragile history, and began his meticulous search. His initial goal was to find descriptions of Nibiru's orbit, not its theological meaning. Astronomers of ancient Mesopotamia were startlingly precise, far more advanced than conventional history often admits. They tracked planetary movements with meticulous care. Finch, using his photographic memory for the Sumerian star maps he had studied during his undergraduate days, dismissed then as archaic superstition, started comparing the astronomical datasets he had brought with him, encrypted on a highly secure memory stick, against the literal depictions baked into the clay. The contrast between the cold LED screen of his laptop and the coarse, millennia-old clay felt profound. It was a bridge spanning 6,000 years, connecting a cutting-edge observation of an object moving at breakneck speed to a forgotten civilization's chilling prophecy. What he found surpassed his worst fears. On a particular tablet, often dismissed as detailing a merely religious procession, Finch identified a complex geometrical depiction. It wasn't a god or a king, but a highly accurate representation of a binary star system, the elliptical path of a massive body, and the specific angle of inclination that matched his calculations precisely. The Sumerians had not just recorded the existence of the planet, they had charted its trajectory and, crucially, its periodic return. This orbital path was known to them as Sar, the period of 3,600 years, a number so frequently dismissed as mythological exaggeration, was embedded in the calculations, disguised as a ritualistic cycle. The Anunnaki, the Sumerian pantheon of gods who descended from the sky, were explicitly linked to this orbital cycle. They were not merely spiritual entities, they were travelers, immigrants who used Nibiru as their transport system, arriving when the orbits aligned. The sheer audacity of the ancient record was stunning. They had calculated celestial mechanics without modern telescopes or computational power, presumably because the knowledge was imparted by the very beings who used those orbits. Finch felt a cold sweat break out despite the regulated temperature of the archive. The cuneiform text accompanying the diagram spoke of the lords who came from the crossing, the Anunnaki, describing them as beings of colossal stature and advanced intellect, capable of manipulating genetic code and planetary resources. Their primary purpose, the tablets implied, was self-preservation, utilizing Earth's resources, particularly gold, to repair or stabilize Nibiru's volatile atmosphere during its long sojourn in the outer reaches of the solar system. He spent the remainder of the day making high-resolution photographic records of the relevant tablets, painstakingly translating every symbol that pertained to celestial observation. The weight of the information was crushing. This wasn't a theory anymore. It was documentation, cross-referenced across scientific and historical fields. He realized that 3I Atlas was not a rogue object. It was, quite literally, the first speck of cosmic dust preceding the main event. It was the warning bell, the first ripple in the gravitational field, heralding the imminent arrival of Nibiru's sphere of influence into the inner solar system. When he finally left the museum that evening, the heavy oak doors closing behind him with a resonant thud, the lights of London seemed trivial, fragile, illuminated only temporarily against the overwhelming darkness of the deep cosmos and the cyclical doom he had just confirmed. He held a secret that could shatter global civilization, and he was just one man in a trench coat, standing on a bustling London street. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque a verdade sobre Nibiru e os Anunnaki mexeu profundamente com você. Então fortalece esse conteúdo. Curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa urgentemente ver isso antes que seja tarde demais. The immediate challenge for Dr. Finch was how to present this revelation to the established scientific community. He couldn't just walk into the Royal Society and announce that Sumerian mythology was his primary source for a new planetary discovery. He decided on a two-pronged approach. First, present the irrefutable orbital mechanics anomaly related to 3I Atlas, proving the existence of a massive external gravitational influence, and second, introduce the historical context as corroborating evidence only after the mathematical proof was accepted. He meticulously prepared his presentation for the next quarterly seminar at the Institute, choosing his words with surgical precision. The seminar room was typically reserved for the genteel review of minor stellar phenomena or the intricacies of black hole thermodynamics. Today, however, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, largely because Finch, usually reserved, had advertised his topic cryptically as Interstellar Object 3I Atlas, a re-evaluation of extrasolar system perturbations. Senior professors, their tweed jackets slightly askew, sat in the front row, spectacles perched on their noses, ready to offer polite yet merciless critiques. The room itself was cold, the central heating struggling against the biting British autumn. Finch began by presenting the raw data on 3I Atlas. He showed the velocity, the observed path, and the standard predictive model, which showed minor deviations. So far, so ordinary. Then he introduced his revised computational model. He walked them through the mathematics, step by step, demonstrating how the observed deviations in 3I Atlas's flight path could not be accounted for by the known gravitational forces of Jupiter, Saturn, or even the distant Kuiper belt. The deviations were too consistent, too powerful, and originating from a direction far beyond the established limits of the solar system. He paused for dramatic effect, allowing the complex equations detailing the gravitational vector to sink in. When he finally revealed the source required to generate that specific, consistent perturbation, a body roughly 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting at a 30-degree inclination, and positioned currently in the Oort cloud region, the polite murmurs in the room immediately ceased. Silence descended, heavy and disbelieving. Professor Harrington Smythe, the Dean of Astrophysics, a man whose reputation was built on mathematical certainty, cleared his throat loudly. "Dr. Finch," Harrington Smythe drawled, his voice carrying the faint disapproval of the establishment, "your calculations are pedantic as always, but the source of this calculated perturbation, this hypothetical Planet X, is entirely theoretical. We have absolutely no empirical evidence for a body of that magnitude." Finch anticipated the reaction. This was the moment of the pivot. "Precisely, Professor," Finch countered, maintaining a calm, almost unnerving composure. "Empirical evidence is what we lack today, but what if the evidence existed millennia ago? What if a previous civilization charted this celestial body, not as a hypothesis, but as a known, recurring visitor?" He then projected the photographs of the Sumerian tablets onto the screen, the crude, yet mathematically sound, depiction of Nibiru's orbit filling the room. He pointed specifically to the cuneiform description of the Saar period, explaining its correlation to 3,600 Earth years, and how the ancient observers seemed to possess an institutional knowledge of this object's cyclical return. He spoke about the Anunnaki, not as gods, but as the intelligence associated with this planet, beings who used this orbital mechanism as a highway between worlds. The reaction was not acceptance, but immediate, hostile rejection. It wasn't the mathematics they questioned now, it was the inclusion of ancient mythology, the unforgivable breach of academic decorum. Dr. Finch had crossed the line from cutting-edge science into outright pseudoscience. "This is preposterous, Finch," roared a junior lecturer. "You are citing children's stories to explain a highly complex gravitational issue. Are you suggesting that the Anunnaki designed the trajectory of 3I Atlas?" Finch felt the isolation closing in. The room seemed to shrink, the disapproving glares multiplying. He knew the argument was lost the moment he uttered the word Sumerian. The scientific dogma was too powerful, the fear of ridicule too strong. He had offered them irrefutable proof, dressed in an unwelcome historical context, and they chose to reject the whole truth rather than confront the uncomfortable reality. As he packed up his notes amidst the frosty silence, he realized his fight would not be against the cold data of space, but against the stubborn, willful ignorance of the human establishment. His professional life in Cambridge was over. Now he was a pariah with a world-ending secret. The subsequent days were a blur of professional isolation and mounting paranoia. Dr. Finch was not simply dismissed. He was meticulously, surgically dismantled by the institution he had served for 20 years. His research funding was immediately frozen. Colleagues, who days earlier had shared pints and debated string theory with him, now avoided his gaze in the corridors, walking past his office with hurried steps. The official line was that Dr. Finch was experiencing acute professional stress and needed a sabbatical. Unofficially, he was a cautionary tale, an example of what happens when science dares to touch the fringes of the occult. He understood the mechanism. It wasn't maliciousness, merely self-preservation. No one wanted their reputation tainted by association with a man who claimed that Planet X, the bogeyman of theoretical astronomy, was real and connected to Mesopotamian deities. Yet Finch knew the ostracism was more coordinated than simple academic snobbery. He had received subtle warnings, veiled threats disguised as friendly advice. A senior colleague, Professor Davies, a man Finch respected deeply, took him aside one afternoon, his voice low and urgent, smelling faintly of pipe smoke and damp wool. "Alistair, listen to me," Davies had whispered, leaning close. "Drop this Anunnaki nonsense. Focus on the perturbations. That part is interesting if unproven, but if you keep talking about ancient gods, they will not just remove your grant. They will make sure you never work in a research capacity again. Some things, Alistair, are better left unsaid. There are forces at play, things beyond the scope of Cambridge politics. Take a holiday, man. Go to the Highlands. Forget the whole bloody business." Davies's genuine fear was palpable, far exceeding the usual anxiety over grant money. It made Finch realize that the establishment wasn't just the academic ivory tower, it was something far deeper, perhaps governmental, perhaps military. The implications of a confirmed civilization-ending celestial body, coupled with the arrival of extraterrestrial entities, were surely enough to trigger a massive classified cover-up protocol. If Nibiru was real, the governments of the world would not announce it. They would suppress it at all costs to prevent global panic. Finch returned to his flat, the small, cluttered dwelling a refuge from the penetrating cold of Cambridge society. He drew the curtains tightly shut, instinctively seeking anonymity. He noticed small details that sharpened his paranoia. A white van parked across the street for hours, the sudden, faint crackle on his landline when he discussed his data with a non-academic contact, the way the lock on his door seemed subtly scratched, as if someone had attempted entry. He began operating under the assumption that he was under constant surveillance. His mission shifted from convincing the scientific elite to circumventing them. He needed to find others, the genuine fringe researchers, the independent historical interpreters, the quiet voices on the internet who hadn't been filtered out by mainstream dogma. He realized that the true shocking correlation between 3i Atlas and the Sumerian tablets would only be accepted by those who had already been labeled outsiders. His next step was clear: infiltrate the underground network of Planet X believers, but do so with the caution of a spook operating behind enemy lines. He was now an astronomer, turned unwilling investigator, trying to broadcast an urgent signal from within a locked room. He spent the next few days scrubbing his digital footprint using a rudimentary, encrypted Linux system he'd built years ago as a hobby. He accessed obscure forums and deep web archival sites, searching for individuals who discuss Sumerian cosmology with academic rigor, rather than mere fantasy. He was looking for evidence of other researchers who had reached the same conclusions, even if they used less sophisticated astronomical tools. He found a handful, scattered across the UK, their theories relegated to poorly formatted PDFs and archived blog posts. One name stood out: Dr. Ilara Vance, a disgraced Assyriologist from Glasgow, who had lost her tenure after publishing a paper suggesting the Anunnaki engineered human evolution. Finch knew he had found his first potential ally. He sent a short encrypted message to an outdated email address associated with Dr. Vance, using a pseudonym: 3 Atlas, orbital mechanics match SAR calculation, seeking confirmation. The reply came back instantly, shockingly fast. "Meet me at the Eagle, London next Friday. Don't be late. And don't bring a mobile phone." The instruction was simple, direct, and confirmed his suspicion. He wasn't alone, and whoever was watching him was not to be underestimated. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque isso mexeu com você de uma forma que a ciência oficial não consegue explicar. Então, fortalece esse conteúdo, curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa ver o desdobramento dessa conspiração de Nibiru. The Eagle pub, nestled near a bustling corner of London, was an unlikely location for a clandestine meeting about planetary doom and ancient alien engineering. Dr. Finch arrived punctually, deliberately taking a circuitous route and employing counter-surveillance techniques he'd only read about in spy novels, changing tubes 3 times, lingering in shop doorways, and checking the reflection in darkened windows. The persistent, heavy London drizzle clung to his trench coat, making him feel damp and utterly exposed. Inside, the pub was warm, noisy, and smelling strongly of stale beer, chips, and cheap disinfectant. The perfect camouflage. He spotted Dr. Ilara Vance immediately. She wasn't what he expected of a disgraced academic. She was sharp, dressed in utilitarian black, her hair pulled back tightly, and her eyes, an intense, piercing blue, constantly scanning the room. She was sitting at a corner table, nursing a half-pint of bitter, a copy of the Financial Times spread out before her as a shield. He approached her cautiously. "Dr. Vance?" he asked, his voice low, trained to cut through the pub noise. She didn't look up, but responded immediately. "If your calculation of 3I Atlas's trajectory requires a major gravitational influence outside the ecliptic, then you are either a madman or you have finally seen the truth of the Sumerian star charts." She lowered the paper, fixing him with that unsettling gaze. "Sit down, Dr. Finch. I assume you didn't risk the train from Cambridge to discuss the weather." Finch sat opposite her, feeling a rush of relief mixed with acute fear. He had found someone who spoke his language. He ordered a black coffee, a bitter contrast to the comforting beer she sipped, and placed his memory stick discreetly on the table, covering it with a coaster. "The trajectory is precise," Finch began, keeping his voice deliberately flat. "The perturbation required a body 10 times the mass of Earth, inclined at 30 degrees. The period matches the SAR cycle from the Assyrian records. I believe 3I Atlas is not a comet. It's a marker, a proof of concept." Ilara Vance leaned closer, her expression shifting from cautious assessment to intense interest. "I've been tracking 3I Atlas since the initial reports, looking for exactly this. For 30 years, they called me a lunatic for insisting the Anunnaki were celestial navigators, not abstract deities. My research showed that the Sumerian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, is fundamentally an astronomical text, detailing Nibiru's violent entrance into our system, creating the asteroid belt and tilting Uranus." She paused, taking a deliberate sip of her bitter. "Tell me, Doctor, what did they offer you to keep quiet? Early retirement, a generous grant to study something innocuous, like stellar nursery gases. Dismissal, professional isolation, and implied threats," Finch admitted, a grim smile touching his lips. "It appears the cover-up prioritizes reputation destruction over bribery, at least initially. They don't want Nibiru discredited. They want it forgotten, relegated to the rubbish bin of history." Ilara nodded, her eyes hardening. "Standard operating procedure. I lost my career for suggesting a mere genetic link. You've confirmed the transport vehicle of the gods. You are now a priority threat. We need to move fast. My contacts in Edinburgh, genuine academics who work outside the establishment dedicated to alternative archaeology, have independent confirmations of the SAR period. They've found evidence that the 3,600-year cycle isn't just a record. It's a warning system built into various ancient calendar systems, from the Mayan long count to esoteric Egyptian metrics. The realization dawned on Finch. The cover-up wasn't just about controlling information now, it was about maintaining a lie that had been enforced for millennia. The cyclical nature of Nibiru's return meant that whenever humanity got too close to rediscovering the truth, the custodians of the secret, whether governments, secret societies, or the Anunnaki themselves, stepped in to erase the data. He looked at the noise, the casual humanity bustling around them in the pub, and felt a profound sense of temporal isolation. He and Ilara were viewing time on a 3,600-year cycle, while everyone else was stuck in the mundane fortnight cycle of a UK payroll. "We need a safe harbour," Finch said, lowering his voice further. "My flat is compromised. I suspect my calls are monitored. We need a secure location to consolidate the data and prepare a release package that is too comprehensive to be dismissed as the rantings of one eccentric astronomer." Ilara finished her bitter, her gaze distant. I have a remote cottage in the Scottish borders, completely off-grid, solid stone walls, and nobody bothers the old witch in the hills. We consolidate there. But first, you need to see what I've been hiding. Not the historical evidence, Alistair, the physical evidence. She retrieved a heavily encrypted solid-state drive from her inside jacket pocket. If 3i Atlas is the proof of the planet, this is the proof of the Anunnaki's presence here, and their alarming interest in current Earth events. The journey from London to the Scottish borders was long, arduous, and fraught with mounting tension. Dr. Finch felt an almost unbearable pressure. He was officially missing from his academic post, traveling with a disgraced Assyriologist and carrying highly sensitive data that could destabilize global economies and political structures. The black cab ride to King's Cross Station felt like crossing a critical boundary, leaving the false safety of mainstream society behind. Inside the cab, away from the immediate scrutiny of the pub, Ilara Vance explained the contents of her drive. It wasn't just more historical context, it was a complex series of geometric and mineralogical analysis reports compiled by a defunct archaeological team she had once worked with in Iraq. They focused on anomalous structures discovered beneath the oldest ziggurats, specifically in the city of Eridu, purported to be the first city founded by the Anunnaki leader Enki. The reports confirm the use of materials on Earth that should not be there, Ilara explained, her voice barely a whisper against the engine drone. Specifically, isotopes of heavy metals that don't match our terrestrial geological baseline. They are perfectly stable, non-radioactive, but alien. And more chillingly, the structures they analyzed in Eridu align perfectly with the trajectory of Nibiru on its last passage 3,600 years ago. It's not just alignment, it's a celestial timing mechanism built into the very foundations of the city. Finch absorbed this detail with the detached objectivity of a scientist, even as the implication hammered at his sense of reality. So the Anunnaki established landmarks that functioned as orbital trackers. They wanted subsequent generations, or perhaps their own returning envoys, to know precisely where and when the crossing occurred. Exactly, Ilara confirmed, her intense eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. And that's where the technology came in. My team discovered traces of an incredibly sophisticated resonance shielding around the core structural components. It suggests the Anunnaki were capable of manipulating gravity or, at the very least, shielding against massive gravitational fluctuations, precisely the kind that would occur during a planetary crossing. They were not primitive gods using stone tools. They were engineers using applied physics beyond our current comprehension. The thought of an extraterrestrial civilization capable of manipulating gravity, arriving cyclically to harvest resources, profoundly altered Finch's perspective on the threat posed by 3i Atlas. If the object was simply a natural comet, the threat was impact. If it was an Anunnaki probe, the threat was intentionality. Was the Anunnaki return benevolent, or were they returning to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs? The planet they had, according to the tablets, genetically modified life upon. The cab pulled up to King's Cross. The station was a bustling hub of human activity, a microcosm of the civilization they were trying to save, completely oblivious to the cosmic clock ticking down in the Oort cloud. They purchased tickets to Edinburgh, paying in cash, avoiding all digital footprints. As they waited for their train, Finch found a moment to look at the drive again, feeling the solid weight of the evidence. He thought about the vastness required to generate a 10-Earth mass body, orbiting through the eternal cold of space for millennia, and the sheer audacity of the beings who made the journey their routine commute. He realized the urgency had just escalated. If the Anunnaki possessed this level of technology, they would be aware of the contemporary scientific advancements of Earth. They would know that Dr. Finch's calculations, however isolated, were possible, and they would certainly know about the surveillance capabilities of the modern world. Their covert actions were not just aimed at silencing a few professors. They were likely anticipating their return and clearing the path. The danger was no longer academic. It was existential. They boarded the overnight sleeper train, a relic of British rail transport, seeking anonymity in the long, rhythmic clang of the wheels against the track, heading north towards the relative safety of the Highlands. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque essa narrativa de Nibiru e o acobertamento global mexeu com você no nível mais profundo. Então, fortalece esse conteúdo. Curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa urgentemente ver isso e entender o que está em jogo. Inside the cramped, slightly worn cabin of the sleeper train, the darkness outside was absolute, punctuated only by the occasional distant light flickering past. The train's low rumble provided a monotonous soundtrack, masking the low, intense dialogue between Finch and Vance. They were moving, which provided a temporary illusion of safety, but Finch could not shake the image of the white van parked outside his flat. He knew the surveillance network was wide and pervasive. Ilara opened her laptop, the screen heavily shielded against wandering eyes, and pulled up the most astonishing piece of data from the Eridu analysis. A detailed three-dimensional rendering of what the archaeological team had called the resonance key. It was a highly stylized symbol, recurring throughout the hidden structures, which, when translated into a complex mathematical frequency, resulted in a harmonic vibration that perfectly mirrored the known frequency of the element gold, Ben-Au. The Sumerian texts are clear, Ilara murmured, tracing the complex curves of the symbol on the screen. The Anunnaki came here primarily for gold, not for decoration, but for atmospheric repair on Nibiru. They needed it to stabilize their environment during the planet's vast, cold journey through the outer solar system. This resonance key suggests they didn't just mine it. They had a method of manipulating it, perhaps even transmuting other elements, using highly specific vibrational frequencies. Finch leaned closer, his astronomer's mind focusing on the physics. If gold is the key to their survival, and they require it urgently due to their planet entering the more hostile, denser areas of the Oort cloud, then their return won't be a friendly visit. It will be a desperate grab for resources. He connected this to the political climate of Earth, the ongoing global instabilities, and the obsession with gold reserves held by central banks. Was the current economic structure the artificial value placed on gold, an ancient, subliminal legacy left by the Anunnaki? He shared his latest refinement of the 3-eye atlas data. The object was now accelerating slightly in a manner inconsistent with purely gravitational freefall towards the sun. It's not just following the orbital mechanics of Nibiru, Ilara, Finch explained, pointing to the velocity graphs. It is adjusting its path. This tiny object, barely registering on long-range scopes, is either being nudged by an unseen force, or it possesses its own propulsion capabilities. It is a guided probe, transmitting information back to the incoming planet. The implications solidified the narrative. The Anunnaki were actively scouting Earth, assessing the current environment, the resources, and perhaps the resistance they might face. The time frame was shrinking dramatically. Finch's original calculation based on the SAR cycle suggested a crossing window of several decades. Now, with the acceleration data from 3-eye atlas, that window was narrowing to a terrifying, immediate future. Ilara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We need to get to the cottage, Alistair. My network contacts are waiting for the final word. We have a mathematician in Glasgow who can independently verify your velocity vector, and a linguist in Aberdeen who specializes in pre-Akkadian dialects. She might be able to find the Anunnaki's mission statement within the cuneiforms. We must synthesize this evidence and publish the combined truth immediately, before 3-eye atlas crosses a point of no return." Finch felt a renewed sense of purpose, overriding the fear. He was no longer a lone academic fighting dismissal. He was part of a crucial, covert resistance, racing against a cosmic clock and the inevitable brutal reaction of the powers determined to silence them. He looked out the window again. The first hints of dawn were beginning to streak the Scottish horizon, painting the sky in cold, bruised purples and blues. They were getting closer to the sanctuary, but the distance to achieving their goal, convincing the world, felt vast and impossible. What if they failed? What if the Anunnaki arrived, found humanity unprepared and fighting amongst itself, and simply viewed Earth as a convenient pit stop for gold? They disembarked in Edinburgh, the air crisp and bracing. They avoided the main thoroughfares, taking a series of local buses and eventually hiring an anonymous old Land Rover with cash from a grizzled man who didn't ask questions. The journey into the Scottish borders was slow, winding through ancient glens and past vast rolling moorlands, where the only sign of civilization was the occasional sheep pen and dry stone wall. The landscape itself felt timeless, perhaps having witnessed several of Nibiru's previous, unrecorded cycles. The cottage was exactly as Ilara had described, remote, built from thick, unforgiving stone, with a slate roof battered by centuries of Scottish weather. It was tucked deep within a valley, invisible from any major road, accessible only by a single muddy track. The interior was small, functional, and smelled pleasantly of peat smoke and damp earth. A roaring fire was already going in the hearth, indicating that Ilara's preparatory work was meticulous. "Welcome to our war room," Ilara said, throwing her heavy duffel bag onto a simple wooden table. "No mains electricity, no internet line, and the nearest functional phone box is 3 miles away. If they want us, they'll have to come and fetch us physically." Finch felt the immediate, tangible relief of having severed the electronic leash. He set up his minimal equipment, his encrypted laptop, the solid-state drives, and a satellite communications terminal designed for high-altitude trekking, capable of transmitting encrypted bursts of data to pre-selected recipients. This was their lifeline. Their first priority was triangulation. Finch worked with the raw 3i Atlas data, running advanced simulations. The Glasgow mathematician, Dr. Ian MacLeod, known only by his encrypted handle, Hephaestus, had already confirmed Finch's initial findings on the required mass and inclination of the perturbing body. MacLeod had taken it one step further, running probabilistic risk assessments for Earth based on various scenarios of Nibiru's approach velocity. The data was chilling. Nibiru's gravitational field was so vast that even at the point of its maximum distance from Earth's orbit, its influence would be catastrophic. The initial effects would not be tidal waves, but geological instability. The predicted alignment suggested extreme tectonic plate stress, leading to a massive increase in earthquakes and volcanic activity, a global catastrophe known in some esoteric texts as the Great Shaking. As the night wore on, fueled by thick vegetable soup and strong whiskey, Finch cross-referenced the tectonic predictions with the Sumerian records. Ilara had brought a tablet reproduction detailing a cataclysmic flood, the Gilgamesh flood narrative, but Vance insisted the core story was older, detailing a global geological trauma preceding the hydraulic event. The timing of this ancient shaking matched the previous predicted passage of Nibiru. "It seems the Anunnaki weren't just exploiting gold," Finch concluded, wiping condensation from the outside of his mug. "They might also be partially responsible for the planet's instability, or at the very least, they are capable of predicting and surviving it due to their advanced technology, while leaving us to fend for ourselves." Ilara then introduced the linguistic data from Aberdeen, provided by Dr. Morag Davies, Scribe. Scribe had isolated a repeating pattern in the Sumerian creation myths, a sequence of commands given by the Anunnaki leader Enlil to his subordinates. This wasn't mythology, it was a checklist. The checklist included establish the gold reserve, Eridu, monitor the planetary trajectory, ziggurats, prepare the seed world, genetic modification of primitives, i.e. humans. But the final command, which Scribe had only just translated, was the most disturbing. Initiate protocol. Isolation and harvest. Isolation and harvest. The words echoed in the small cottage. It suggested a clinical, dispassionate approach to Earth. They didn't intend to colonize permanently, nor did they intend to help. They intended to take resources, including the perfected genetically engineered workforce, humanity, and then retreat as the planet underwent its 3,600-year gravitational turmoil. The full picture was terrifyingly complete. 3I Atlas was the advanced scout, confirming Earth's readiness. The ancient texts were not myths, but operational manuals and catastrophic warnings. And the timing, spurred by the acceleration of 3I Atlas, was far sooner than anyone had dared to imagine. Finch looked at Ilara, the shared weight of this terrible truth momentarily connecting them across the ancient cosmic divide. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque a urgência dessa revelação de Nibiru está te prendendo. O que você faria se estivesse na pele de Dr. Finch, com esse peso nas costas? Comenta aí se você também já se sentiu assim. Escreva nos comentários, isso é inacreditável. Só para eu saber que você está junto nessa jornada. The Scottish fog was thick, insulating the small cottage from the outside world and lending an air of surreal secrecy to their operation. Dr. Finch felt the necessity of action pressing down on him, the feeling of the cosmic clock ticking amplified by the silence of the valley. Their immediate goal was to prepare the full data package, the orbital mechanics, the Sumerian correlations, and the mineralogical evidence for mass, anonymous distribution. Finch spent hours refining the calculations related to the SAR cycle's impact on Earth's orbital stability. He realized that the ancient texts detailed not only the return of Nibiru, but also the significant long-term climate change and environmental chaos that followed each passage. The Anunnaki weren't just surviving the gravitational shifts, they were using the period of planetary instability to conduct rapid, high-intensity resource extraction, operating with impunity while the planet was in geological turmoil. Ilara focused on creating a concise yet powerful narrative that would frame the scientific data within the historical context, making it digestible for the public without relying solely on esoteric interpretation. They needed a translator, a bridge between the cold math of astrophysics and the shocking narrative of ancient history. "We can't just release a massive data dump, Alistair," Ilara insisted, stirring the embers of the fire. "It will be instantly dismissed as noise or deep-faked data. We need a proof-of-concept release first, something irrefutable that confirms our methodology, paving the way for the full revelation." 3I Atlas is the proof of concept, Finch countered, adjusting the aerial of the satellite terminal. Its current anomalous acceleration is the smoking gun. If we can predict precisely where 3I Atlas will pass closest to Earth based on Nibiru's gravitational trajectory, and that prediction is verified by independent observatories, even the most skeptical academics will be forced to look at the Sumerian model. They worked for an uninterrupted 20 hours. Finch's eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, but the focus was absolute. He charted the predicted path of 3I Atlas over the next fortnight. Due to the influence of the approaching gravitational shadow of Nibiru, 3I Atlas would deviate significantly from its currently accepted trajectory. Finch predicted it would pass through a relatively obscure region of the Taurus constellation, visible only briefly from the southern hemisphere. But the deviation would be profound, a massive challenge to established physics. They packaged this single prediction, the precise coordinates and predicted deviation, along with a brief, encrypted summary referencing the SAR cycle correlation, and prepared it for simultaneous transmission to 3 major, yet independent, amateur astronomical societies. one in Australia, one in Chile, and one in South Africa. The amateur network was their greatest asset. They operated outside government funding and academic dogma, driven purely by the passion for observation. Just as Finch prepared the transmission sequence, a low, unnerving sound cut through the silence of the valley. It wasn't the wind or the rain, it was the faint, cyclical beat of rotor blades. A helicopter, low, slow, and definitely approaching their location. Finch and Ilara exchanged a look of sheer panic. Despite all their precautions, the surveillance had tracked them. Perhaps a satellite sweep picked up the heat signature of the fire, or maybe the ancient Land Rover had a concealed tracker. The isolation was broken. The clock had run out. Finch had milliseconds to act. He slammed his hand down on the transmit button, sending the encrypted burst of data out to the Southern Hemisphere observatories, a desperate message thrown into the cosmic void. "We're compromised," Ilara hissed, grabbing a small, heavy wooden chest from beneath the table. "They won't want the data. They'll want us. We need to leave now." The sound of the helicopter intensified, closer now, deafening, dominating the quiet glen. The shadow of the massive rotor blades flickered across the cottage window. There was no time for sophisticated planning. As the helicopter hovered menacingly above the cottage, kicking up clouds of peat dust and heather, Finch grabbed the essential drives containing the complete Nibiru revelation, and Ilara snatched a heavy, old field compass and a set of local maps. They burst out the back door, running low, seeking the cover of the dense, low-growing gorse bushes that lined the hillside. The terrain was their greatest enemy, but also their shield. The Scottish borders, covered in wet, spongy moss and uneven stone, made movement treacherous. Finch, an academic accustomed to the smooth floors of Cambridge, struggled for purchase, his lungs burning with the effort. Ilara, however, moved with surprising agility, her past years spent on arduous archaeological digs, giving her an innate sense of direction and endurance. The helicopter's searchlight was a menacing yellow eye, sweeping the small valley floor. They ducked behind a massive moss-covered boulder, the thumping rotors vibrating through the very earth. Finch could hear muffled shouts, definitely British accents, professional, likely military or highly specialized government agents, perhaps MI6 or a dedicated GCHQ snatch squad. They were not dealing with clumsy local police. "They're not landing directly next to the cottage," Ilara gasped, her breath ragged. "The ground is too soft. They'll drop 2 teams, one on the ridge, one by the track. We have maybe 3 minutes before they establish a perimeter." "Did the transmission go through?" Finch asked, his voice tight. "Yes, a clean burst. 3 separate targets. It's out there now," Ilara confirmed, her eyes fixed on the ridgeline. "But it's only a prediction. It needs time to be verified. We need to survive for a fortnight, Alistair, just a fortnight, until the amateur astronomers confirm the 3-eye Atlas deviation. That's the deadline." The pressure of the deadline was immense. If they were captured, the transmission would be immediately dismissed as compromised by a discredited source, and the cover-up would continue unchallenged. Their survival was intrinsically linked to the validation of Nibiru's trajectory. They scrambled further up the hill, toward a thicket of ancient, stunted pine trees, hoping the canopy would obscure them from the thermal cameras that the agents were surely employing. The wind was fierce and biting, carrying the sharp scent of wet pine needles. Finch risked a glance back. 2 figures clad in dark, tactical gear were already descending the ridgeline, moving with terrifying speed and purpose. "The old shepherd's trail," Ilara pointed, indicating a barely visible, overgrown path leading deeper into the wilds. "It leads to the river. If we can reach the river, we can use the water flow to mask our scent and throw off any dogs they might use." They plunged into the thicket, the rough branches scraping at Finch's face and hands. The physical exertion was overwhelming, forcing the abstract calculations of celestial mechanics out of his head, replacing them with the raw, brutal calculus of survival. He was no longer thinking about Three-Eye Atlas's velocity. He was focused on the next foothold, the next desperate breath. As they reached the riverbank, a sheer, muddy drop, they heard a sharp, distinctive crack, a warning shot fired into the air, far too close for comfort. They knew they were spotted. Ilara didn't hesitate. She slid down the bank into the frigid, fast-flowing water, the shock of the cold making Finch gasp. He followed instantly, the icy water hitting him like a physical blow. The cold was incapacitating, but it was also their only chance. They were racing the clock, the establishment, and the terrifying approach of a planet shrouded in ancient myth and modern suppression. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque essa tensão de Nibiru, Anunnaki e a perseguição secreta está te consumindo. Não pare agora. Comenta aí se você também já se sentiu assim. Escrevo nos comentários. Isso é inacreditável. Só para eu saber que você está junto nessa jornada. The freezing water of the river offered temporary protection, masking their thermal signature and scent from the pursuing agents, but it exacted a heavy toll. By the time Finch and Ilara dragged themselves out onto the opposite bank, dripping and shivering violently, they were dangerously close to hypothermia. Every movement was slow, painful, and labored. They sought refuge in the deep undergrowth, relying on the cover of the dense, ancient forest. "We need to get warm," Finch muttered through chattering teeth, his mind struggling to maintain cognitive function against the paralyzing cold. "We won't last the night like this." Ilara, despite being equally soaked, maintained a focused intensity. She pulled a small, tightly sealed emergency kit from the heavy chest she had brought, containing a foil blanket, waterproof matches, and high-energy rations. In the darkness, guided by the faint glow of the crescent moon, filtered through the dense canopy, they managed to scrape together enough dry kindling to start a small, sheltered fire beneath a protective overhang of rock. As the minimal warmth slowly seeped back into their limbs, the urgency of their situation returned. The transmission of the Three-Eye Atlas prediction was their only insurance policy. If they were captured now, the authorities would issue a swift denial, claiming the data was fabricated by fugitives under duress. They had to remain free until the global amateur astronomical community had time to observe and confirm the deviation. Finch used the moment of relative calm to review the data on his secured drive. The predictive model for Three-Eye Atlas's trajectory confirmed that the deviation, the gravitational slingshot effect caused by Nibiru's influence, would be most pronounced and observable precisely 1 fortnight from that night. 14 days. That was the window of immunity they needed to secure. They debated the Anunnaki's possible motivation. If the Anunnaki were simply returning to harvest gold, why bother with such an elaborate, multi-millennial cover-up? Why didn't they simply land with overwhelming force? Because they value subtlety and control, Ilara argued, warming her hands over the small fire. The Sumerian texts describe them setting up systems, agriculture, cities, laws, not just brute domination. They engineered us, Alistair. They need our compliance, or at least our functional servitude, for the harvest to be efficient. Uncontrolled global panic would ruin the resources and the workforce. They need to maintain the illusion of human sovereignty until the last possible moment. Finch thought of the global systems of control, the centralized media, the political inertia, the absolute dismissal of anything outside the established dogma. It was a control mechanism perfected over millennia, designed to keep humanity focused on immediate, trivial concerns, football scores, celebrity gossip, minor political skirmishes, while the vast cosmic truth approached unnoticed. They spent the remainder of the night planning their route. They had to travel deep into the highlands, seeking out another contact Ilara had nurtured for years, a retired RAF radar technician who lived entirely off-grid and possessed the equipment necessary to securely upload the full dataset. including the Sumerian and mineralogical evidence, once the three-eye atlas prediction was confirmed. The technician, known only as Whisper, was located near Loch Ness, a perfect location, remote, often shrouded in thick mist, and ironically, already accustomed to hosting its own form of mystery and mythology. The journey would be slow, dangerous, and entirely on foot, relying on old maps and Ilara's field expertise. They moved at first light, leaving the faint traces of their fire behind, venturing deeper into the cold, silent wilderness of Scotland. The weight of the encrypted drives felt heavier now, not just because of the information they held, but because they represented the sole, fragile hope for human awareness against a conspiracy spanning epochs and star systems. Every step was a battle against the elements, and the relentless pursuit of the agents they knew were still searching the glen below. The following days blurred into a grim cycle of relentless hiking, cold rations, and minimal sleep. The Scottish Highlands were merciless, a brutal combination of boggy terrain, sudden chilling mists, and steep, rock-strewn inclines. Finch, the urban academic, was pushed to the absolute limit of his physical endurance. His expensive but ill-suited hiking boots were ruined, his feet were blistered and aching, and the constant mental pressure of being pursued grated on his nerves. Ilara proved to be an invaluable guide, moving with an almost primal instinct through the wilderness, reading the signs of the forest and the weather with ease. She taught Finch how to walk softly on the damp ground, how to mask their passage, and how to identify safe spots for resting that were protected from aerial observation. During a brief, sheltered rest stop near a waterfall, the sound of the cascading water offering temporary acoustic cover, Finch revisited the fundamental question of the Anunnaki. Were they purely malevolent? The Sumerian texts were contradictory. They spoke of the Anunnaki giving humanity civilization, knowledge, and agriculture. Yet they also spoke of them inflicting terrible suffering and maintaining a strict hierarchy of servitude. "It's not good versus evil, Alistair," Ilara offered, sharing a dry piece of jerky. "It's utility versus survival. They created us to be slaves, the Adamu, the black-headed people whose purpose was to mine gold. They granted us intelligence and complex society only to make us more efficient workers. When they return, they will assess whether we are still compliant and functional. If we panic, if we rise up, we become a liability, and they will treat us as such." The revelation that humanity's entire existence was potentially a 3,600-year genetically engineered work cycle was psychologically crushing. Finch had spent his life searching for objective truth in the stars. Now he faced the awful truth that our reality was merely an advanced maintenance schedule managed by extraterrestrial entities. They reached their prearranged rendezvous point with Whisper, the retired radar technician, late on the 5th day of their hike. It was a dilapidated stone hut nestled on the remote eastern bank of Loch Ness. The loch, shrouded in a legendary mist, seemed an appropriate backdrop for the final act of this cosmic drama. Whisper turned out to be a wiry, taciturn man with enormous calloused hands and a pair of intensely scrutinizing eyes. He had been expecting Ilara, and his hut was a marvel of low-power, high-security communications technology, all running off silent solar panels and a hidden micro-hydro generator. Whisper immediately began setting up Finch's satellite terminal with his own equipment, integrating a military-grade encryption layer. The tension was almost unbearable. They had 9 days remaining until the critical observation window for Three-Eye Atlas. "We need to monitor the amateur network constantly," Finch explained to Whisper, laying out the timeline. "We sent a prediction for a dramatic deviation in Three-Eye Atlas's path. If the astronomers in Chile and Australia report confirmation, we launch the full data set. If they are silent, or if they report a correction that aligns with established models, then my data was seized and manipulated, and we need a different plan." Whisper nodded grimly, his expression unreadable. "They are good at manipulation, Doctor. I spent 30 years watching the sky for the RAF. I know how quickly inconvenient objects can be classified and scrubbed from the public record. We will use a network of rotating proxies. They will not trace the source. Finch felt a surge of hope. They had the means. They had the data. All they needed now was confirmation from the silent, staring telescopes of the Southern Hemisphere. The fight had moved from physical survival to a digital waiting game, a race between the speed of astronomical confirmation and the reach of the forces determined to maintain the Anunnaki secret. Se você chegou até aqui, é porque você entende a gravidade do que Dr. Finch e Elara estão enfrentando. Eles estão na mira de uma conspiração que abrange milênios e galáxias. Comenta aí. Qual você acha que é o verdadeiro plano dos Anunnaki? É a sua chance de participar dessa investigação. The atmosphere inside the hut was electric, thick with anticipation and exhaustion. 12 days had passed since the hurried transmission. Finch, Elara, and Whisper had operated in a state of hypervigilance, constantly monitoring the encrypted amateur astronomical feeds. The cold reality of waiting for confirmation on a matter of planetary significance was brutal. Sleep was fitful, haunted by the spectres of Nibiru and the pursuit team they had narrowly evaded. Whisper's equipment allowed them to passively monitor communications without revealing their location. He filtered through thousands of threads, papers, and astronomical logs from independent observatories worldwide. Most threads continued to discuss 3I Atlas as a routine interstellar comet, adhering strictly to the official, discredited trajectory. The cover-up was effective. Then, on the 12th day, in the early hours of the morning, a flicker of confirmation appeared. It wasn't a formal announcement, but a frantic discussion buried deep within a private peer-to-peer forum used by South American amateur astronomers. The thread was labeled 3I Atlas, Serious Error in Ephemeris Data. A Chilean astronomer working near the Atacama Desert reported a massive, inexplicable deviation in 3I Atlas's observed position. The object was not where the official chart said it should be. It had jumped several degrees, an impossible movement without an external gravitational field. Finch's heart hammered against his ribs. He rushed to the monitor, his fingers flying across the keyboard to run the comparative analysis. The Chilean data was rough, but it aligned almost perfectly with the coordinates he had transmitted from the cottage. The trajectory, influenced by the 10 Earth mass body, Nibiru, at a 30-degree inclination. "It's happening," Finch whispered, the relief and terror fighting for dominance. "They saw it. The deviation is confirmed." Within hours, the Australian network chimed in. Their observations of 3I Atlas confirmed the Chilean report, adding higher-resolution spectral analysis. The object wasn't just deviating, its movement was exhibiting subtle signs of non-gravitational acceleration, suggesting the probe's self-propulsion capabilities. 3I Atlas was performing a precise, calculated maneuver to ensure its arrival at the predicted rendezvous point with Earth's orbit. Elara immediately began compiling the final release package. The confirmation of the deviation was the key. Now they could unlock the true meaning of the anomaly. The package included Finch's complete orbital calculation, the photographic evidence of the Sumerian tablets detailing the SAR cycle, Elara's translation of the isolation and harvest protocol, and the mineralogical evidence of Anunnaki-era gravitational shielding found in Eridu. Whisper was tasked with the final broadcast. He activated a sophisticated high-power uplink system, designed to bypass traditional internet routes and broadcast directly through multiple rotating satellites, masking the source location completely. Finch stood ready, watching the monitor count down the final seconds before the transmission. He knew that once this data was out, there was no turning back. The scientific world would be forced to confront the impossible truth, and the geopolitical consequences would be immediate and devastating. He thought of the quiet life he had left behind in Cambridge, the comfortable routine of equations and academia, now replaced by freezing nights in a Scottish hut, fleeing powerful, unseen enemies. But he had no regrets. The truth of the universe, however terrifying, had to be revealed. The broadcast sequence initiated, a massive flood of highly compressed, encrypted data streaming out into the global digital ether. It was targeted at thousands of journalists, scientists, and political figures worldwide, delivered simultaneously and anonymously. The Nibiru code was finally unleashed, but the story wasn't over. As the final confirmation of the broadcast flashed on the screen, Whisper's radar array, which usually tracked routine aircraft, registered a massive, unexpected signature. It was low, moving fast, and unlike any terrestrial aircraft. It was coming from the direction of the lock. "Doctor," Whisper said, his voice grim, pointing to the monitor. "That's not MI6. That's something else. It's too big, too fast, and it's descending directly onto our coordinates. They weren't just watching you, they were waiting for you to reveal the final piece of the puzzle." The sound outside the hut was not the familiar thump of rotors, but a deep, resonant hum, followed by an unnerving, high-frequency whine. The Anunnaki had arrived early. The final, terrifying moments unfolded with the ruthless efficiency of a celestial judgment. The object that descended onto the shore of Loch Ness was huge, silent, and obsidian black, reflecting the cold, grey light of the Scottish twilight. It was definitely not a military helicopter. Its geometry was alien, angular, and imposing. The air around the hut grew heavy, charged with a strange static energy that made the hairs on Finch's arms stand up. Finch, Elara, and Whisper watched from the window, frozen by a mixture of shock and sheer awe. The Anunnaki had responded to the broadcast instantly, confirming their own advanced monitoring capabilities and their terrifying proximity. They had allowed Finch to reach his conclusion, to synthesize the data, and then, the moment he broadcast the evidence, they moved to intercept the source. As the massive craft settled, a ramp lowered soundlessly, revealing 3 colossal figures stepping onto the damp ground. They were humanoid but impossibly tall, easily exceeding 9 feet, clad in seamless, dark metallic armor that shimmered faintly in the fading light. Their movement was fluid, deliberate, and carried an undeniable aura of immense power. These were not myths. These were the lords who descended from the heavens, the Anunnaki. Elara stepped back, her face pale, gripping Finch's arm. "They're here for the source. They want to contain the narrative before it spreads beyond control." Finch felt a terrible, cold certainty. The broadcast was out. The truth was loose in the digital world. Their physical capture no longer mattered as much as the fact that the seed of doubt had been planted in the minds of the global scientific community. "Whisper," Finch said, his voice strained but steady. "Initiate the destruction sequence on all local drives. We can't let them recover the full, unencrypted backup." Whisper, already anticipating the order, pressed a large red button on his console. A small, internal puff of smoke confirmed the physical erasure of the backup data. The Anunnaki figures were moving towards the hut, their powerful strides covering the rough ground effortlessly. Finch could now make out details. The helmets were sleek, visorless, yet their presence projected an overwhelming sense of ancient, weary authority. They had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Finch made a final, desperate observation, drawing on every ounce of his training. He noticed the energy signature radiating from the craft, a stable, low-frequency hum, identical in its harmonic signature to the resonance key Elara had identified in the Eridu ruins, the frequency of manipulated gold. The connection was undeniable. Their survival, their power, and their ability to travel depended entirely on the resource they had instilled humanity to mine. As the figures reached the doorway, blocking the last sliver of natural light, Finch had one last thought. Was this the end of the suppression or the beginning of the open conflict? The Anunnaki were here, proving the ancient texts true, but their unexpected arrival also served as the most terrifying confirmation of the looming catastrophe heralded by Three-Eye Atlas. The final revelation was not just the existence of Nibiru, but the realization that the Anunnaki were not saviors. They were just another desperate species, clinging to survival, ready to use any means necessary to secure their required resources before their home planet's chaotic return. The ultimate question remained unanswered. Would they destroy the Earth utterly during the harvest, or merely leave it scarred and broken for the next 3,600-year cycle? Dr. Finch's fate, along with Ilara Vance's and Whispers, remains unknown. The massive data leak concerning the Three-Eye Atlas deviation was immediately and ruthlessly scrubbed from public servers, replaced by an official narrative claiming state-sponsored misinformation. Yet, the seeds were planted. That single, frantic broadcast from a hut by Loch Ness resonated across the globe, forcing amateur observers to question their charts, pushing professional scientists to quietly re-examine their discarded Sumerian texts, and ensuring that the silence surrounding Nibiru, the silence enforced by millennia of Anunnaki control, was irrevocably broken. The Planet X is coming. The gods have returned. And humanity has just 2 weeks to realize the magnitude of the danger before the full gravitational shadow of the planet of the crossing engulfs us all. Se esse conteúdo abriu a sua mente sobre a verdadeira história da humanidade e a ameaça de Nibiru, comenta aí, cheguei até o fim. Isso ajuda a entender quem realmente está buscando conhecimento além da superfície. Curte o vídeo, se inscreve agora no canal e ativa o sininho, porque os próximos episódios vão ainda mais fundo, revelando o que aconteceu com o Dr. Finch. E não sai sem clicar no próximo vídeo. Ele é a continuação dessa jornada e revela a próxima fase do Isolation and Harvest Protocol.